Hey guys, so welcome back to this series on mastering TSQL, where we take you from being an absolute beginner to some of the more advanced concepts in TSQL so that you can become proficient with this powerful language. Today, we're going to look at the insert into statement. This is our fourth video in the series, and we think it's an apt point in time that you learn the insert into statement, which is quite a powerful and necessary statement in TSQL. So within this video, we're going to do some live coding demos, and we're going to learn some variants of the insert into statements as well, where we can insert data into all columns of a table. Then we can learn how to insert into specific columns of a table, and also we can learn how to insert data into multiple rows at once. So these are a few variants of the insert into statement, and it will all make some more sense to you once we've taken a look at some of the coding demos that are coming up. So just taking a step back from our previous lesson on the types of TSQL statements, we remember that the insert into statement comes under the DML or data manipulation language. These are a group of SQL or TSQL commands that deal with the manipulation of data present in the database, and they are the group or component of SQL and TSQL statements that controls access to the data and to the database. And it's very important to note that DML commands are not auto-committed, means they are not permanently saved to the database, and they can be rolled back. Unlike the DDL commands, which we had looked at some of them previously, the DDL commands are auto-committed, and that means they are permanently saved to the database, and it's a bit more complicated to undo these changes once they have been made. So now let's jump into the insert into statement. So the insert into statement is basically used to insert new records into a table. So by new records, we mean rows of data in a table. So when we talk about tables, we remember that they are made up of rows and columns. So rows of data, so each row of data is a record of data pertaining to a single instance of an object, and the columns in that table would contain data about the different attributes regarding to an object that we are trying to describe. So with the insert into statement, we want to insert new records in a table, or new rows into a table. And the syntax, there are multiple ways in which we can write the insert into statement, and these multiple ways offer us different capabilities as well. So we're going to look at 4 of them today, 4 different ways to use the insert into statement. And the first one is the vanilla and the orthodox or original way of using the insert into statement. So let's take a look at the syntax. And in this first variant, we specify both the column names and the values to be inserted. So looking at the syntax, we've got insert into table name, and then after table name, we use brackets and write down the list of all the columns in the table, whose table name we have given there, and which is the table that we want to insert data into. Then we close the brackets once we've listed all the column names, and then in the next line we write values, and then we open another bracket with and then insert the list of values that we want to insert into the table. And it's very important that the order of the columns that we've given in the first bracket list is the same as the values that we want to insert into the respective columns. So you'll get an idea of what I mean when we look at the demo. So I'm just opening SSMS now. So in SSMS, you can see what we've done here. In the last few videos, we've created a database test DB, and then we've learned how to use the use command, and we've written use testdb, which navigates the SQL server into the testdb database instance. So now when we query, we'll be accessing that specific database, and inside testdb we've now created a table ingredients, and ingredients has 3 columns, where we've got the ingredient ID, which is an integer, an ingredient name, which is a varchar, which is basically a string, and ingredient price. So when we run this select star from ingredients, which just basically shows us the data in the table, and we click execute, we can see that we get 3 rows here: ingredient ID, ingredient name, and ingredient price, and they're not populated with any data. So now we're going to change that by using the insert into statement. So here I've written down the vanilla instance, or the original orthodox implementation of the insert into statement, where we've written insert into ingredients. Ingredients is the table name, and then we've listed in brackets all the columns in the ingredients table. So it's important in the orthodox way to not leave out any columns and basically list all column names. And then we close that bracket, and then we write values, and in another once we've opened bracket, another set of brackets, inside that we list the data that we want to insert into the table. And it's important that the order here is the order that you want the data to be implemented in the table. So as you can see in the first set of in the first list, where we've listed the column names, ingredient ID comes first, and in the values list 1 comes first. That means 1 will be inserted as the ingredient ID for this set of data. So basically you just want them to match up with their respective column names. And pertaining to the data types, when we use integers or floats, we can just write the number as is right there. Maybe if you're using a float, you can specify a decimal and put a 0.0, but otherwise the only significant difference here is that when we use strings and specifically in SQL, that is varchars or nvarchars, we have to use single quotes or double quotes to specify the string. So I would prefer that you use single quotes, because sometimes double quotes can cause problems. So here we've specified in the ingredient name carrot as the string, and we've put it inside single quotes. So I'm just going to execute the statement now. So we select the statement, execute, and we can see that 1 row has been affected. Now I'm just going to show you the table again after this point. And now we can see here that the first row of data has been inserted. So we've got ingredient ID 1, ingredient name carrot, and ingredient price 6. Then we can come to the next variation of the syntax in the insert into statement. And in this variation, we realize that if we are indeed inserting data into all columns of the table, then we do not have to specify this string, this list of column names inside brackets that we had been doing in the previous version of the syntax. So in this version of the syntax, we've just got insert into table name, and then we write values, and then we list the values. But make sure to remember that this is only if you are inserting data into all columns of the table. And again, we have to make sure that the order of the values that we list has to be the same, or it has to be in the order that we want them inserted into the table, corresponding with the columns in the table, right? So how we do that here, I've done an implementation here for you. Let me just uncomment it. So if we look at both of these statements side by side, we can see that in the second version, I'll just highlight that, we write just insert into ingredients, values, and then we list the values. And then if we compare that with the previous version of the syntax that we used, we notice that the only difference is that there is, in the previous version, there is the list of all the column names that are in the table. So here in this new version, we don't have to write down that list of all the column names. This can be a big time saving, especially when we use big tables which have lots of columns. So this can be quite helpful to us, but remember that it is only when we're inserting data into all columns, and that the order of the data is again important and it has to correspond to the correct columns. So let's just insert this and see how it goes. So we select this, execute, and again let's display the table. So now we can see that the second set of data, which has ingredient ID 2, ingredient name tomato, and ingredient price 5, has been inserted without any issues. So we've learned the second way to insert it into a table. Now let's look at the third type of insert into syntax, and this is quite interesting. So this is talking about how to insert data into specific columns only. And with this syntax, and this comes into play generally when we have more complex tables with many columns, and in these kind of complex tables, a lot of these columns are optional. In a lot of these tables, some of the data becomes available only at a later stage in time, so we can't obviously wait or not write the data that we have with us and wait until all the data is available, because that would not be practical. So what we can do is we can insert data only into specific columns of tables. And how we do this, let's look at the syntax. We write insert into table name, and then in that list of column names, like we had done in the first variant of the syntax, we list the column names, but here we list only the column names that we want the data to be inserted into. So here, for example, in the syntax, I've given column 1, column 4, and column 5, means we've skipped column 2 and 3, but that is just a hypothetical example. And then values, and then when we list the values, again we just list the values which we want to be inserted. And it's important to remember that the number of column names that we have listed should be equal to the number of values that we have inserted, and the order should be corresponding to the which value has to go into which column. So value 1 will go into column 1, value 4 will go into column 4, and value 5 will go into column 5. So the order and the number of items or values in that list has to correspond with the number of columns in the list. So I've implemented that here for you. Let's just take a look at that. Let me just uncomment again. So here we have a situation where we only want to insert the ingredient ID, which is 3, and the ingredient name, which is chicken. Maybe we don't know the price, or maybe we'll find out the price at a later point in time. But the way to do it is we write insert into ingredients, which is the table name, and in this list of column names we only list the IDs, the column names that we want data inserted into. So in this case we write insert ingredient ID and ingredient name only. We leave out ingredient price, then we close the bracket, and then we write values, and below values, in the list of values we want inserted, we just write again the two data fields that we have, which is the ingredient ID 3 and the chicken, and the name of the ingredient, which is chicken. So again we can see that the number of column names matches the number of values to be inserted, and that the order is also corresponding, which means 3 goes into ingredient ID and chicken goes into ingredient name columns. So let's just execute this and see what happens. So the keen-minded among you will be wondering what happens in the third column, or ingredient price, for this row of data. So here we can see that we get a null value in this third row of data in the ingredient price column. So null is not the same as 0, but rather it signifies that that specific location is void of data or empty, and it is completely different from 0. So say we were calculating the average price. If we had a 0 there instead of a null, this would affect the calculation of an average. So that is the one of the benefits of null, where if we were doing an average, this null data would be discounted and would not skew the results of the average that we were calculating. So here we've learned how to insert data into specific columns of a table only, and then we can finally take a look at another interesting use case of the insert into statement, which is inserting data into multiple rows of a table but using only a single insert into statement. So let's look at the syntax, and it's pretty similar to the previous syntaxes of the insert into statement, where we write insert into table name and then we give the column list. So again, this can be similar to the first variant of the syntax that we saw, or the third variant, where we can specify all the column data types, or all the column names, or only some column names if we want to insert data into specific columns. So I would suggest that you start off inserting data into all columns when you're trying this out for the first time. So we've got insert into table name, then we give the column list, and then we close that bracket, and then we write values, and then here's where the change comes. So in brackets, where we would normally just write one value list within brackets, here once we've closed the first value list, we can add a comma and then add another value list within brackets, and so on. So we can add many comma separated value lists within brackets and then close it off with a semicolon. So this allows us to insert multiple rows of data using a single insert into statement. So let's take a look at an implementation of that. So just uncommenting. So here you can see we've done insert into ingredients. We've given the column name list, and here I've just specified all the columns in the table ingredients, which is ingredient ID, ingredient name, and ingredient price, just to keep it simple. Then we've got values, and then when we write our value lists within brackets, you can separate value lists with commas and hence add multiple value lists here. So we've got one value list which is 4, this first value list has ingredient ID 4, ingredient name butter, and ingredient price 8. We close the bracket, add a comma, and then we can add the next value list, add another comma, and so on, add multiple value lists, which each will be added to the table as individual rows of data. So here, like in the previous variants of the syntax, we can either specify all the columns of data, all the columns in the table name, in the table, or just specific columns in the table that we want to insert data into. But the only key thing is that in the value lists and the column name list should match with each other. That is, they should have the same number of fields, and also the order of the fields should make sense. That means the first element should always be the first value we insert from the value list should always be going into or match with the first column name that we have mentioned. So we can't have butter written before 4 in some situations, so therefore that would cause errors when you're inserting the data. But I think that makes sense to you. So let's just execute this and see how it looks. So we insert into ingredients, and you can see once we've executed that statement, 3 rows have been affected here. Normally it says 1 row affected, but here it's 3 rows affected. And then when we check out the table, we see that we have inserted 3 more rows, that is rows with ingredient IDs 4, 5 and 6, and we've done that using just a single insert into ingredient statement. So thank you guys for watching this video. I think it's been quite an informative one, learning about the insert into statements. So please remember to like this video and subscribe to my channel, as it helps me to continue making videos like this. And also please do give me some feedback in the comments. I'm new to this process, and if there's anything that you feel would help me improve the production quality or the subject matter in my videos, please don't hesitate to comment or reach out to me directly. So once again, thank you guys, and keep watching and learning.